Welcome to the Out of the Best Books podcast, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get talking about the classics. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Not to be confused with the amazing actor Tom Hardy. And when I first heard about Tom Hardy, the actor, I was like, wait, he died a long time ago. But anyways, no, this is Thomas Hardy, an amazing author. Love him. So Far from the Madding Crowd was written a long time ago. The setting for this book, it takes place in sort of a fictionalized area of England that Hardy calls Wessex. And it's set in about 1874 is when it starts. So Victorian England. And he does base it on Dorset, where he lived, but also Wessex, while it's no longer an actual, that's not the name of any place in England right now. In like between the 800s and 900s, so over 1,000 years ago, that actually was a place. That's where some Saxons lived, and it was called West Saxony or something like that. And so people just shortened that and called it Wessex. So it is based on reality. He didn't just like pull that out of nowhere. So when you read it and you're like, that totally sounds like it could be a place in England. Well, it was, just not anymore. So Wessex. And it's just sounds like it's a beautiful country area, lots of farms, and that's the setting. As far as, is there anything you wanted to add about the setting?
I said that he wrote the book in the cottage that he grew up in, his grandfather, which I thought was kind of cool. And that the residents of Wessex are considered to be like a true representation of people that were living in Dorset at the time that he wrote the novel. So,
that's really cool. So he was like basing his characters on people that he kind of knew and interacted with.
Yeah,
that's really cool. So I wanted to add really quickly, I read like the front part of this copy of the book, which looks like it was printed in 1984. So it's like as old as me, which is awesome. But in this version, the intro, it talks about how just Thomas Hardy's journey as an author, and he wanted to be remembered as a poet. And we can talk about him more, but I feel like this is important as we get into the book because it's just so true. It says it was as a poet that he wished to be remembered, but today critics regard his novels as an even more memorable contribution to English literature for their psychological insight, their instinctive delineation of English character, and their profound presentation of great tragedy. And I think that like, it just nails it on the head as you're reading through. Like, it's a really funny story, but it's funny because it's so spot on, like to people and to humanity. And you realize like how much we have in common, even with people from 150 years ago. So
I love getting like how he gets into their heads, and
totally
they have the same like insecurities and thoughts that we might have today.
Yeah, love it. So I feel like that's a good sort of segue into talking about some of the main characters. There's a lot of characters in this book, and they're all kind of fantastic, and we love them. But I think we're just gonna like highlight 5 of them before we start. So obviously the first one is going to be Gabriel Oak, who is a shepherd, and he is the protagonist of the story. He has been through a lot, and he's very steady and sturdy, and he is like an oak tree, so he's aptly named. He goes to work for Bathsheba Everdeen, who is the other protagonist of this story, the female protagonist. And she, like, I feel like a lot of the story is really about her learning about life and maturing and becoming just a fantastic woman. She starts out very, very young and naive and just very vain in the beginning of the book, but she grows through trials and hard things and by being willing to learn and grow.
By the way, I think Bathsheba might be the hardest word I've typed over and over and over again in a long time.
It's a big name.
It doesn't
sure.
like flow in my fingers.
I know.
Kind of funny.
Because it's kind of like all over the keyboard. So the other Bathsheba is this young, beautiful girl, and she has three suitors, and Gabriel is one of them, but he kind of backs off. The other one is a 40-year-old farmer who everybody agrees he's like very handsome, very desirable. He's quite wealthy, but he's also like super boring. He like can't get outside his head. He's one of these people, like I know people like this. They just overanalyze everything. And so it's really hard to have any kind of relationship with him. But he like heavily pursues Bathsheba. And then we also have Sergeant Frank Troy, who, as is inferred, he's a sergeant in the military, and he just has quite the story. And we're going to explore that a lot. And he also loves Bathsheba, or says he does, but she really likes him a lot. So they end up with quite the relationship. And then the last one that I want to talk about, just because she like plays such an interesting role, kind of popping in and out, and it's ultimately her that she just plays such a huge role in Bathsheba's relationships.
Okay.
Without even trying to. She's just there and she's trying to do her best, but she plays a big role. And her name is Fanny Robin. And she's just this little servant girl, this young girl who has an extremely sad and tragic life. So there's some of our main characters.
Yeah, they're going to be fun to talk about, I think. One thing I've noticed throughout through reading is the last names. Like you said,
aren't they fantastic?
Yes, like you said, Gabriel Oak is like an oak tree, and I was like, we'll talk about that more. But like some of the other last names are very fitting for their personalities, and I think it's kind of funny. Like I was thinking about Boldwood.
Yeah.
I haven't figured out Frank Troy, but he's going to be fun to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I guess we should give a brief overview of the whole story. And so jump in whenever you want to. But basically, Far from the Madding Crowd is, again, it's a pastoral fiction story taking place in England. And it's just about this farmer, Gabriel Oak. He's worked so hard all of his life. He finally has a farm. He tragically loses it. And he goes to work, like I said before, for Bathsheba Everdeen, who has inherited a farm from her uncle. And so she's suddenly gone from rags to riches, really. And she's a very intelligent, educated, headstrong girl. And she's determined to do well as a farmer and to do well by the people who work for her, to her credit. And so it's the story of how they, the people of the village and how they all interact. And it's the story of her romances, because she has a few, and her learning and growth, and the steadiness of Gabriel Oak and how he's always there and helping her. And so, yeah, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, what's coming up for me is that like it's also about the gender role expectations, and how she's like kind of breaking through them,
especially for that time period. And she knew that it would be tough for her as a female farmer, the owner of this big and rather prosperous farm, to go in and go to the corn market and be in there with all these men. And she knew that. And so like her personality was just really what it needed to be, so she could take that on.
Yeah, I love how she's like, a lot of times she'll be like, I'm going to be the strong one. Oh, but I really like the attention. Like, so she's kind of back and forth. But yeah, and it's like you get a lot of what the other people think of her position. The people in the it's not the town, because the town people, but like the country people, that she has no business running a farm. She won't be able to do it. So I love that. I love books about women who step up and take care of things when they maybe aren't expected to be able to. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, so let's get into it. I love these chapter titles. It tells
The
you
titles are brilliant.
exactly what's going to happen. Like chapter 1 is called Description of Farmer Oak and an Incident. So we know something's going to happen. So it starts out describing Gabriel Oak, and sometimes he's called Farmer Oak. He's a sheep farmer, and it said that he's morally mixed. What does that mean? He carries his grandfather's silver watch that sometimes doesn't work. He's a 28-year-old bachelor. And I guess that's pretty much all at the beginning.
Well, it does, but I just love this sketch of his character when you say he's morally mixed, because what it makes me think of is when Anne in Anne of Green Gables talks about the man she wants to marry is somebody who could be wicked. He's like, and Marilla's like, you'd want to marry a wicked man? She's like, no, I don't want him to be wicked, but I'd like it if he could be wicked. And I think that that's exactly how he's trying to paint Gabriel Oak. He's like, he's somebody who he's a good person. It's interesting. Here's a great quote. It says, to state his character as it stood in the scale of public opinion, when his friends and critics were in a bad mood, basically, he was considered a bad man. When they were in a good mood, he was a good man. When they were just neutral, he was a man whose moral color was a kind of pepper and salt mixture.
Yes.
So just depended on everybody's mood, what he was. And the thing is, I think the truth is he's just a real person. He's not putting on any airs. He's not trying to be anything that he's not. He's just completely genuine.
Yeah, I mean, I get the idea that he's a super hard worker, right? But that on Sundays when he goes to church, he doesn't exactly pay attention. And so I don't know if that's what they mean by what the author means by he's kind of, I don't know, depends on the day, how to look at him. One December morning, he sees a yellow wagon stop on the other side of a hedge where he's been resting. And the driver tells the girl that's sitting on top of it, she's sitting next to some plants, that the tailboard has fallen. The girl asks him to go get it. And as she waits, she looks down at this package that she has tied up in paper, and she looks to see if the driver's coming back. And then she reaches and unties it and pulls out a looking glass, right? Or a mirror. And she looks into it and she smiles. And she blushes. And then I think she puts it away, right? And Gabriel sees this from kind of behind the hedge. So he turns down the road. And then when he gets to the bottom of the hill, he sees that there's been a dispute with the gatekeeper and the driver of this lady's wagon. And she's saying, we've paid enough. Like, we're not going to pay anymore. But the gatekeeper wants more money for them to go through. And so Gabriel pays the toll for her. And he looks at her, probably like expecting
Maybe just
something.
thanks or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the woman just says to the driver, go on. She doesn't even respond to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is so interesting to me. I wrote down a few notes here right in my book. I think that, first of all, it's an amazing introduction because it tells us exactly where Bathsheba and Gabriel are at this point in their life. First of all, she is extremely vain and pretty entitled. And it even talks about how her thoughts, as she's looking at herself in the mirror, seeming to glide into far off the likely dramas in which men would play a part, vistas of probable triumphs, the smiles being of a phase, suggesting that hearts were imagined as lost in one. So she's like, I'm beautiful. All the men are going to want me, and everything's going to be just, perfect and fun and easy, whatever. And also, she feels like she should be able to pass through the gate without paying the toll. And that to me is huge foreshadowing. She should be able to just flirt with men's hearts and go off and marry whoever she wants to and let let things fall the way they will. No consequences for her. And just as the gatekeeper says, he's like, well, if you don't want to pay the toll, you can't pass, Okay. And in order for her to mature and becomes a very responsible and competent person, she has a lot of learning to do and a lot of trials to go through, and she will. In the meantime, we also have Gabriel, who it talks about how he's extremely practical. He has that silver watch, but he can tell the time by looking at the sun and the stars.
Yeah.
And it talks about how his dress is very practical. He's got these shoes that are like ugly, but they're very functional. He can use them for whatever. He doesn't care what he looks like. He cares how he performs. And we don't know what he's gone through in his life to get to that point. He's 28. Right. So he could have already gone through exactly what Bathsheba is going to go through. But that's where we're sort of our starting point.
For I kind of like that he's kind of disturbed by the fact that she looks in the mirror and, but he doesn't totally despise her because there's enough allure there for him that he wants to pay for her to get through. And, her being superficial doesn't totally turn him off, but
I think he likes her sassiness.
Oh, that could be. Think about all the country songs about women who are wild, sassy. Maybe men like that. I don't know.
I think so.
So then he comes in, right, to the gatekeeper. It's his turn. And the gatekeeper tells Gabriel, that woman back there, or that just came through, she's what they say is handsome, right? Mm-hmm. And Gabriel says, well, she has faults. I just saw them. And then the gatekeeper says, well, is it that she's cheap? I mean, I'm paraphrasing this, right?
Yeah. No, but you're good.
Yeah, he's basically asking,
exactly right.
Is she cheap? And Gabriel says, no, it's vanity. I love it. And Gabriel's hurt, I think, because she doesn't even acknowledge him, which tells him, yes, she's prideful and vain. So,
Very.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I've read this. This is the second time I've read it, and I remember pieces of it, but I just understood it so much better this time. And even just that first chapter, I was like, oh yeah, we're getting back into this. I'm remembering. So the next chapter is called Night, the Flock, an Interior, and Another Interior. I wonder, I'd like to figure out his chapter titles, what the style or reasoning is. Maybe it's kind of funny.
Yeah, he does. He talks about, because Thomas Hardy does the intro for this version of the book, and it was when he reprinted it in 1895. And he talks about remembering all these installments in the weekly or monthly magazine or whatever, And so I do wonder if these were his original titles, and that was just to kind of draw people in and be like, here's what's going to happen. I don't know.
Especially if it's published in a magazine, maybe.
Yeah.
Reason. But okay. So in this chapter, it kind of describes the landscape and the constellations in the beginning. And then talks about how Gabriel's only been a farmer for about a year. Before that, he was a shepherd and then a bailiff, which a bailiff is a manager of a farm.
Yeah, I get the idea. It's sort of like an overseer.
Yeah, it's amazing. What I've been doing this time is writing down words I don't know the definitions to and looking them up. And it's been really funny because it's I've read that word a lot of times in my life and I've never stopped to look it up or figure out what exactly it means. So
that's awesome. So sometimes the definition surprised you?
Yeah.
That's so fun though, because it completely changes how you see things.
Or not. Well, I mean, because don't you think of a bailiff as a police a bailiff in a courtroom?
In a courtroom, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, that can't be it. So I looked it up, but it's a little embarrassing. I'll have to tell you some of the words as we go through here that I didn't know what they meant. And yes, now I do. So
well, and maybe there's some that I think I know what they mean, but maybe I have the wrong definition in my head. So
I'd be like, I've heard that word a lot. I wonder what it actually means. Anyway, so he's been a farmer for a year and he's leased a sheep farm with 200 sheep. So in the beginning, what he does here is he carries a newborn lamb into a hut and he puts it in front of the stove to warm up. And then he lays down and goes to sleep. And he wakes up when the lamb is bleeding or making noise, right? So that happens several times in the book where they bring in a newborn lamb to warm up and then they start making noise saying that they're doing better and maybe ready to go outside. So then he takes him outside to go back to his mother. So this is an example of his intelligence. He determines it's 1 a.m. using the stars as a reference. And he notices a light that isn't a star. And so he starts walking towards it and realizes there's a shed there. And looking down from the roof, so he must be on the roof of his hut. Well, no, because he's walking. So is this like an underground shed, maybe?
So I'm a little confused about that, but yeah, somehow he says he sees her in a bird's eye view.
It says
So
he's
it
on
is
the
like
roof.
they're looking down. So I don't know what that style of barn is.
Yeah, he walks over there and then he jumps on the roof. I don't know.
Yeah, it's something.
Kind of funny. So he sees 2 women and 2 cows, and one of the women is older while the other is young, but he can't see her. And it describes it as Satan first saw paradise, which means from above. Okay, so the older woman says that they're about to go home, and the younger woman yawns and says that she wishes they were rich enough to pay a man to do these things.
Hey, but can we go back a little bit? Because she yawns. And Thomas Hardy takes the time to note that Gabriel caught the infection and slightly yawned instead
Yes.
of like the best detail to put in there. Because how catching are yawns? If somebody yawns, you may not even be paying attention to them, but you see them yawn and you're going to yawn.
Which is funny, just to think that was the case back then, right?
Yeah. Ties us together.
Right. We're still human. And I was thinking about that, like, how many times in life do we say, I just wish I was rich enough to pay somebody to do that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do our yard work, make our food, clean our house. I don't know. But I wish we were rich enough to pay a man to do these things. I love it. So the younger woman, he notices that she calls the older woman aunt. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of picking up clues about her, or gathering information, right? And then he also notices there's a newborn calf between the 2 cows that are in the shed. And the aunt says there's no more bran. And so the younger woman says she's going to go get oatmeal in the morning, but there's no side saddle. Here we go. So the younger woman says, well, I'll just ride what we have. And he notices that the niece seems to be the one that's in charge. Mm. So she's the one with the authority. And Gabriel thinks, I'd like to see this woman who he thinks is probably beautiful, even though he hasn't seen her. I think she's wearing a cloak. Mm-hmm. So her cloak drops and he sees long black hair and realizes that she's the woman from the yellow wagon. Funny,
yeah.
Right.
Well, and leading up to that, like right before she turns around, Hardy says, by one of those whimsical coincidences in which nature, like a busy mother, seems to spare a moment from her unremitting labors to turn and make her children smile, the girl drops her cloak and Gabriel can see that it's the same girl from the wagon. And he's like, oh, I know her. So, but I just love that description. It's like heaven smiled on him.
Yes.
There she is.
It's her. So what's funny is that he thinks that, I mean, in an analysis I read, it said that he thinks that any woman independent enough to ride without a side saddle must be beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then she takes her cloak off and he realizes, and she could also be proud and vain. I thought that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, it's her. Chapter 3 is called A Girl on Horseback Conversation. Gabriel walks back to his plantation and he sees the girl on a pony and wonders if she's looking for, did I miss something? Didn't her hat fall off?
Yeah, she had lost her hat and
didn't.
And he found it.
Yeah, I remember. He found it at 1 in the morning. Isn't that when she
Mhm.
lost? She lost it at 1 in the morning. Yes, the night before. And
Mhm.
he found it. And well, he finds it in the morning. He sees the hat lying in the ditch and he takes it back to his hut. And then the girl rides up to the hut. And as he's about to come out, he sees her looking around as if somebody's watching. And I put down this quote from, or this is what I highlighted from right there. The girl, who wore no riding habit, looked around for a moment as if to assure herself that all humanity was out of view, then dexterously dropped backwards, flat upon the pony's back, her head over its tail, her feet against its shoulders, and her eyes to the sky. I could just see this. I loved it. The rapidity of her glide into this position was that of a kingfisher, the noiselessness that of a hawk. The tall, lanky pony seemed used to such doings and ambled along unconcerned. So this is something that she's done probably many times.
Yeah.
But I just pictured kind of like, I don't know if you remember, we mentioned Anne of Green Gables earlier, but do you remember even in the movie when she's laying in the water in the boat, just like a free, like she's just letting it all loose, laying down.
Yeah, that's
Love
that's
it.
like a perfect connection. And that's probably exactly what she's trying to do. I couldn't help but think, okay, maybe saddles were super different at that point in time, but it sounds really uncomfortable to me.
To lay down.
Yes. Because usually the back of the saddle
Would
comes
come
up a
off.
little bit. And that would be like right into the small of your back. So you'd be like,
Yeah, they must have been different.
they must have been really different.
Yeah. Gabriel goes back to his sheep and the girl comes riding by. Now she's on the horse the right way. And she has a bag of bran with her. And a boy meets her by the cattle shed and they milk the cow together. This is some exciting stuff, right?
Mm.
It's like, who is this boy? And Gabriel waits for her outside. And when she comes out, she's surprised to see Gabriel's face behind the hedge. He blushes and he tells her that he'd found her hat. And she said, "Oh yeah, it blew away last night." And he adds, "It happened at 1 a.m." I was watching you. Why does he know that? Because he was there.
He was out taking care of lambs.
Yes. And she says, "Oh, I needed it to go to town this morning." And he knew that because he saw her going down the hill that morning. I mean, he's just watching her. I wrote down that he's becoming better at spying at her from far away.
And it could come across as kind of creepy. But the thing is, he's just like out doing his work and there's like nobody else around. So when
Yes.
you see another human on a horse, you're just going to notice.
Especially a beautiful one.
Yeah.
And yeah, different. Go ahead.
Well, if it's okay to back up for just a minute,
Yeah.
because it talks a lot about, he takes a minute to sort of take her in, like really observe her now that he sees her like face to face. And so it really talks about how she is very beautiful, has a beautiful face, beautiful hair, beautiful form. But also, I thought it was interesting. It says, from the contours of her figure in its upper part, she must have had a beautiful neck and shoulders. But since her infancy, nobody had ever seen them. So she's very, very modest. And like the style of the time, just for, everyday person, they would wear like, I think like high necks and obviously shoulders covered. But for like fancy occasions, they would often have like low cut dresses, but she had never dressed that way. I think that she'd always been fairly poor. Had she been put into a low dress, she would have run and thrust her head into a bush because she'd be like, no, everybody can see me. And
That's
so
the
really
worst thing she could
exposed.
think of.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yet she was not a shy girl by any means. It was merely her instinct to draw the line dividing the seen from the unseen higher than they do it in towns. So she was definitely a country girl. And this is what she was used to. And this is what she felt was proper and decent. And so while she was vain, she was not somebody who was going to go flaunt anything. She dressed simply and modestly. So
Yeah, I always think like, how dare her look in a mirror? Right? I mean, it's
Well,
not
exactly. Like
nowadays, not that big of a deal.
not a big deal. Exactly.
Yeah. So he knew because he saw her that morning because he saw her going down the hill. She blushes and turns away. Hears the sound. He looks up, and then when he looks back, she's gone. So he goes back to his work. He is very calm until he's talking to her.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden he gets very nervous. And we're not sure if he meant to tell her that he saw her riding the horse in a what would be considered less than feminine way, right? In the not proper way. And he seems more embarrassed than she does. She seems to kind of own it and like, yeah, I was doing that. You saw me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but him admitting that he saw her, she now knows that he saw her riding that way.
Yeah. And it even says that it was like, says his want of tact had deeply offended her, not by the fact that he'd seen her, but by the fact that he'd said he'd seen
Yeah.
her.
That he told her.
Yeah.
So she keeps coming back every day for 5 days, but she totally ignores Gabriel. And she's offended because he saw her and he let her know. Yeah, I mean this indicates that she's prideful because she doesn't want to associate with someone who'd seen her do something that might not be acceptable for her gender. So, do you have anything else to add for chapter 3?
Well, just that last part I think is it's good because she actually saves his life because he lives in this little tiny hut. And apparently, like, I don't know very much about this. I guess we could have researched it a little more, but there's like a couple of holes in these little huts that they have to keep at least one open for ventilation. And I don't know if it's because of their fireplace, if, having the fireplace going, if there's not the ventilation, and he must not have any windows. And when the door is shut, it must like completely, block out everything. So if there's not ventilation, they can basically suffocate, is what I understand. And so he had closed both of them. He'd meant to go over and open the other little ventilation hole, but he was so exhausted that he just laid down and went to sleep. And he could have died. What I gather is it's almost as if we left the gas on in our house and basically asphyxiate ourselves.
Didn't wake up.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I just remember her going in and like she's like ripping his collar open.
yes.
And he's kind of like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, because she knew that that's what was going on. I think that his dog was barking. His dog was barking really loudly. And so she runs over to see what was going on because she'd been out milking the cow. And so she figured out pretty quickly what was going on. So she goes in, all she had was a pail of milk. And so she dumped the milk on his head to wake him up. And like you say, she like opened up his shirt and he wakes up with his head in her lap and he's like, "Oh, hi." And from there, he tries to find out her name because he still doesn't even know her name. So he tells her his name, but she's like, "Well, you need to ask my aunt what my name is." She's like very flirtatious. Okay, should we just jump into chapter 4?
Yep.
All right. So this is where it gets exciting. Bathsheba had been coming to this milking pen from her aunt's farm because right now she's visiting her aunt on her farm. And she'd been coming to this milking pen, which is close to Gabriel's hut and his farm, a couple times a day, every day to milk the cow. But he knows that, and as all cows do, eventually the cow's going to dry up for the season and she's not going to be there anymore. And he's like dreading that time because every once in a while he's out working, he's able to catch a glimpse of her. And so obviously he has this little crush, right? So he decides that he can't live without seeing her. And so the best solution is to make her his wife. So, and as we talked about before, he's just like super practical, not dramatic, not terribly emotional. And so he's just like, well, this is the thing to do. And so he gets himself ready, which is hilarious. The way that he talks about getting himself ready. Like he
He puts
um
all the hair oil on his head,
like,
all of it.
he put his basically his best clothes on. He shines his boots. He takes a new handkerchief from the bottom of his clothes box, puts on his light waistcoat, and uses all the hair oil he possessed upon his usually dry, sandy, and inextricably curly hair till he had deepened it to a splendidly novel color between that of guano, which is poop, and Roman cement, making it stick to his head like mace round a nutmeg or wet seaweed round a boulder after the ebb. Like you just imagine like that slimy seaweed just like slicked around a rock and like that's how his hair is plastered to his head, and it's just so
It's
funny.
funny because he's like trying not to get too dressed up, but like
Yeah.
he looks foolish.
He totally does because he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yes.
But bless his heart, he's trying. And so he goes down to um, the aunt's house and he asks if Miss Everdeen is in. And her aunt says, well, no, she's not, but you can wait if you want to. And he says right to Mrs. Hurst, he's like, I was going to ask her if she'd like to be married. And she's like, oh, you were? Yeah. Because if she would, I should be very glad to marry her. And then he's like, do you know if she's got any other young man hanging about her at all? And Mrs. Hurst, this is hilarious. This is Bathsheba's aunt. And she's like, oh, there's so many men hanging around her. She's like, well, she's really pretty and she's very educated. She was a governess, but she was a little too wild for that, but very educated, very beautiful. All the men like her. And so Farmer Oak, I love what he says. He's like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. I'm only an everyday sort of man. And my only chance was in being the first comer. Well, there's no use in my waiting, for that was all I came about. So I'll take myself off home along, Mrs. Hurst. He's like, well, apparently I was too late. So never mind. I guess I won't marry her. And he's like, okay, see you later. But then he's going back to his farm, and all of a sudden he hears Bathsheba. She's running after him. She's huffing and puffing. Her cheeks are red. Of course, she looks gorgeous because she's like running and flushed, and her hair is everywhere. And she's like, "Wait! I don't want you to think that I have a young man right now because I don't." And he's like, oh, like he totally takes it the wrong way. Basically thinks that she's saying, oh, so I'll marry you because I don't have young men. She's like, oh, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I just didn't want you to think that, that I'm attached to anybody. That would be horrible if you thought that.
Yeah,
And
she even tells him I've never had one
yeah, yeah, she's never been
before.
attached to
Yeah.
any man. Yeah. And so I think her aunt was probably right in saying that lots of men liked her, but she never courted anybody, never had a relationship like that. And so he decides to just go ahead and be like, well, will you marry me? And she's like, basically, no, because she's afraid. Well, he tells her, okay, well, just don't answer yet. Just think about it, And she's like, well, I've been trying to think about it. For a marriage would be very nice in one sense. People would talk about me and think I had won my battle and I should feel triumphant and all that. But then I'd have to have a husband. So she loves the idea of getting married and having a wedding and all it's that vanity part of her, right? And having all the pomp and circumstance that comes with that. But she hates the idea of what comes after. Like she doesn't actually want to be married. She just wants to have a wedding.
Because yeah, then she's like, well, then I'd have you. I mean,
Yeah.
she's like,
Yeah.
but I don't
Pretty
want a
harsh.
husband.
Yeah. Exactly. And she says, you are not the right person for me because I want somebody who can tame me. I'm too independent and you would never be able to tame me. I know that. They have this long conversation, and finally she convinces him that she's just going to say no, and she's going to keep saying no. And she's like, I don't have any money it wouldn't even do you any good to marry me because you're already a poor farmer. Like, you need to marry a girl who has some money that can help you in the world. But she's like, but at the same time, I'm better than you because I'm more educated than you. And he's like, well, I had thought about that. I had thought that I would need to marry somebody who has some money. And she's like, then why'd you even ask me? It was like, he's damned if he does and damned if he
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, he's
And
like, that crossed my mind.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
So
I
finally,
love the part where he says, he asks her, well, why won't you marry me? Why can't you marry me? And she says, well, I don't love you. She's very blunt. And he says, well, it's fine if you just like me. Like,
yeah.
I can live with that, but I'm going to keep loving you until the day I die. And then now this is the point where she's like, maybe I shouldn't have run after him to tell him this. Like,
Maybe that was a stupid move, which it was. It wasn't fair to him at all. And
no.
it just, again, we're talking about her maturity, and she's not mature. She's
No.
very naive, and she just kind of like flies off the handle and does whatever comes to her head, which is often stupid. So it's fine.
Yeah. So, I mean, we get the idea that Gabriel's like, he's willing to settle for whatever he can get from her, right? Even if it's just a partnership. And she realizes in the conversation, she's realizing how he feels for her, right? And that's when she's like, maybe running towards him to just correct the information wasn't a good idea. I
Nope.
just, yeah. At which they're both showing immaturity in,
Oh, well,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, he's also very naive. I mean,
Yes.
it makes me wonder. I can't remember if it talked about it because it must have, because it talked about how he lived with his father for a long time and his father had trained him to be an excellent shepherd. But I think that it may talk about or infers that his mother had passed away a long time before. And I just think
Yeah.
he
He didn't
needed the
have.
influence of a mother to be like, okay, son, that's not what we do.
Anyways, it's very funny.
Yeah. So then the next chapter, we find out that Bathsheba, so this is chapter 5, the departure of Bathsheba and a pastoral tragedy, which it totally is. So
This is so
Bathsheba
sad.
leaves. It is so sad. So Bathsheba leaves because she'd been there visiting her aunt, but then she goes back home. And it's some distance away from where Gabriel lives. And I love this because it says, it may have been observed that there is no regular path for getting out of love as there is for getting in. Some people look upon marriage as a shortcut that way, but it has been known to fail. So he's like, if you want to not love somebody anymore, you should marry them because sometimes that works. Like
Works.
you fall out of love with them if you marry them.
But not
But
always.
but that's not without fault. Like sometimes that doesn't work because sometimes people actually really do like each other and stay in love even after they marry. And so yeah, he's like the pathway out of love is not very clear where you can fall in love with somebody and in your heart and your head you know that you need to not love them anymore, but a lot easier said than done. And so that's kind of the case with Gabriel Oak. He's like, she's gone and she's totally refused him. And there's just like no way that she will ever marry him, but he can't really accept that. And then we get into the tragic part of this, besides her leaving and him not being able to fall out of love with her. So Gabriel has two dogs. One is George and one is George's son. And he has 200 head of sheep and also a bunch of lambs. And most of those sheep are pregnant with at least one lamb. A lot of times, they'll have twins. Sometimes they'll have triplets, but not very often. So he's about to like majorly multiply his flock, right? Well, his sheepdog George is older and he's very well trained, but the son of George, who doesn't actually have a name, he's just son of George, not very well trained, and he's very overzealous. And one night Gabriel wakes up because he realizes that something is just off. He hears something strange. It's like the ringing of the sheep's bells. And so he realizes that either they're on the move or they're like vigorously eating something, enough to make their bells shake. So he jumps out of bed and he's trying to find them. And he follows their tracks and realizes, so he lives pretty, not like super near, but like kind of close to a cliff. And there's a gate blocking that cliff, but he sees that George's son, the dog, was so overzealous in his job of herding the sheep that in the middle of the night he had herded the sheep right off the cliff. And this is what sheep will do. You hear the phrase like, well, if so and so jumped off a cliff, would you? Well, it really comes from sheep, because like if one of them jumps off the cliff, the rest of them will. Like they don't have problem solving skills. They're not very smart creatures. And if some of them start jumping off, the rest of them will. They'll just go off the cliff. And every single one of his, I mean, it's just devastating. He goes to the top of the cliff and he looks down, and there's every single one of his 200 ewes, and they're all dead or dying. And he thinks about the babies growing inside them, and it's just so devastating, because that's his whole life. Like that was his plan, to raise these sheep, sell the babies, sell the meat, sell the wool, and just help himself along the way. And now it's completely gone. He's completely destitute. And George's son, George's son had done his work so thoroughly that he was considered too good a workman to live. And so Gabriel had to put him down. He had to shoot him because he had cost Gabriel everything.
Yeah.
And so as a result, Gabriel goes and he sells everything that he possibly can, and to pay off any debt that he has. And so he doesn't have debt, but he also has nothing else.
Yeah. It was his life savings.
It was.
Well, and he'd put everything into it, and then he owed money.
Right.
So he realizes, like, his first thought is the sheep. And then his second thought was that they weren't insured. Mm-hmm. And then that they were his whole life savings. And then as he thinks about it, he's like, well, and then he says, good thing I'm not married.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought that was really good. So then fast forward a couple months, and Gabriel goes to Casterbridge, a little town. And what they do in Casterbridge is each year they have a hiring fair. So everybody they can be carters and wagoners, thatchers, shepherds, anybody that has some sort of a trade, they go to this fair to try to be hired, often probably by, more wealthy farmers or whoever. And so he decides to go to this fair to try to sort of advertise his skills. I think that initially he wants to be hired as a bailiff, and then he realizes it might be better to be hired as a shepherd, because shepherds are more needed. So he gets himself a shepherd's crook, and he does that. And he's had lots of farmers come along and interview him, but they ask like what was his last farm and like what happened to his sheep type of thing. And they decide they don't want to hire him, which is so devastating, because it's one of those things. It's like not his fault. Totally a freak thing. He's an amazing shepherd, so conscientious and so good with the sheep. Nobody will hire him. One thing that he does decide to do is he pulls out his flute. Apparently he's an amazing flutist, and he plays these tunes and everybody loves it. But he also finds out that there's another sort of
job fair.
Yeah, job fair. I know, that's what I want to like. It's like what they have in high school. But he finds out there's another job fair in Shottsford, and he finds out that in order to get to Shottsford, he has to pass through Weatherbury. And the first thing that comes to his mind is that's where Bathsheba is. And so he heads along his way. He falls asleep in this random wagon that he finds along the way. And then as he wakes up, he hears the driver and the person with the driver talking about some woman who has inherited a farm, and they're kind of giving their opinion on that. And he has no idea what they're talking about. He jumps off the back of the wagon and starts walking along, and he becomes aware that there is a big fire nearby. So he heads over to the fire, And all these people are scrambling around, running around, trying to put out this fire on this farm. And he's just very like, this is his personality. And it goes back to his name being Oak. Like, he takes charge. He knows what to do. He's very sturdy, very steady, tells people what to start doing. And they are able to much more effectively and efficiently put out the fire. And next thing we know, the owner of the farm comes up, and it becomes evident very quickly that it's a female. She's riding on a horse, and dun dun dun, it's Bathsheba Everdeen.
It's fate.
Yeah, it totally is.
And people are wondering who that guy up on the roof is with the crook, and nobody knows who Gabriel is.
Yeah,
but he's the one that just like took charge and took care of everything.
Yeah, kind of saved the day. Oh, and I wanted to go back because when those people are talking in the wagon about her,
Yes,
some of the things that they say are so funny. And it's like what we're just saying, like, they're very judgmental of her. And they say that she's vain because she looks in a glass to put on her nightcap properly. Oh no.
And she doesn't even have a husband.
And she's not married.
Would that be different looking at a mirror to put your nightcap on if you were married? So that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. And he's wondering, like, he's laying in the back of the wagon wondering, could they be talking about Bathsheba? Because it sounds like her.
It sounds like her. Yeah.
Yeah. So he finds out that the farmer is a female and that she is very wealthy.
Yeah. And that she's come to the farm because her uncle had, I think, unexpectedly died and left it all to her. So she's inherited it. And they're all kind of surprised, but they're all workers on the farm. And so they do want her to succeed. I mean, I think I get that impression. They want her to succeed because her success means their success. But they're really funny. And we get this introduction to them when Gabriel goes, well, first of all, when he's riding in the wagon, but when he goes to try to help with the fire, we're introduced to Billy Smallberry, Mark Clark, the Coggins, and the Coggins are this big family, and the Smallberries are this big family that have been there forever. But it says the assemblage, so everybody that's there belong to that class of society which casts its thought into the form of feeling and its feelings into the form of commotion. And they set to work with a remarkable confusion of purpose. So it's just like, there's chaos in their brain. And so there's chaos on the outside, and there's just chaos everywhere. There's just nothing good is happening. And that's why Gabriel comes in and he starts directing things, and they're able to put the fire out.
Yeah. Once he finds out there's a female, he says, well, does she need a shepherd? Like, any chance she needs one? And then she lifts the veil and he sees who it is. And she doesn't say a word, and he repeats his question, but he does it in like a very mechanical tone. Like, I think he's a little shaken up too, but he's like, oh yeah, do you need a farmer?
Do you need a shepherd?
Yeah.
He mechanically repeated in an abashed and sad voice, do you want a shepherd, ma'am? Because you have to think that, the last time he saw her, she doesn't know about his misfortunes. Last time he saw her, he was like wanting to marry her because he was like, look, I've got a sheep farm and I'm doing well. And so it would be a good match, And now he's like, probably just so mortified.
Well, now the argument that she doesn't have any money is null.
Yeah, that's true. But also but he's probably feeling just like lower than nothing because he has nothing. And he needs to work for her.
Which makes you think, why would he want to marry somebody that had a lot of money? I don't know. That argument didn't make any sense from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a different time, though. I think that all men wanted to marry a woman that had lots of money. Yeah. Because that meant that they would be rich.
So chapter 7 is next. I love some of these. One of these chapters that we did in the beginning was really long, but most of them are very short. So they're kind of they're kind of fun. I wrote down that Bathsheba is somewhat amused. She must be amused that it's him, right? And she does admit that she needs to hire a shepherd. And she tells everybody standing around to go tell Gabriel to talk to the bailiff. And so Gabriel goes and asks the bailiff. He must ask him about getting a job, but he also asks if he has somewhere for him to stay.
Yeah.
And he says he doesn't, but he says, go check with Warren's Malt House. Do you know what a malt house is? Is it like a bar?
So what I'm assuming is that it's a beer making place. So it probably is a bar as well, but it's probably where they actually make the beer. Right?
Yeah, so
because
he's
not how you make beer is like with malted barley or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I should have looked it up, but so Gabriel's walking to the village and he's thinking about how much Bathsheba has changed. She must seem more confident, like she's got this new status. I don't know. And he runs while he's walking there. He goes through the churchyard and he runs into a pale, thin girl. And later we'll find out who this is, but he finds out that she's also going to the malt house. And so he asks her how late the Buck's Inn is open. So that must be like the lodging place around there. And he tells her he's not from around here. He's not from Weatherbury and that he's a shepherd. And she says, well, you kind of seem like a farmer. It's like not fooling anybody.
You're not just a shepherd. You're a farmer.
And then she asks him, don't tell anybody that you've seen me because I don't want anybody to know. I'm poor and I want to be anonymous. So he agrees and he gives her a shilling. So he gives her some money. Yeah. And this one's called Recognition, a Timid Girl. So the timid girl. Okay. So chapter 8. This is the first chapter in the book that I read and had no clue what happened.
Oh, okay.
I'm getting this because I struggle with older writing and classics. And I'm I'm understanding this. And then I read this chapter and I was like, I have no idea what this is about. So I had to look it up. Then I went back and read it again. I still don't. Anyway, but I do know what happened, but not from reading the actual book.
Okay. It's so funny because, and if I could insert this here. So this group, so Gabriel goes to the malt house and he meets like all of the people who work on the farm. And they're just like the villagers, but they are sort of a copy of Shakespeare's comedic relief in all of his plays. Because whether it's a tragedy or a comedy, Shakespeare always has comedic relief. And sometimes you're like, why are these people even here? But they always play a part somehow. But they're amazing. And so, like, it makes me think of the players in Midsummer Night's Dream with Nick Bottom and others. And also in The Tempest of Stefano and Trinculo. And even like just there will be like a random gesture or whatever. A lot of times they come across as quite foolish, but they also have this insight that you can't get anywhere else, and they're just so funny. So to me, they're his version.
I think these scenes where these people are, these extra characters, are what reminds me of a play. Like before we started recording, I mentioned that this reminded me of a play. I could see it as a play. And so these, people sitting around a bar talking, gossiping, whatever. It just seems like totally. I guess it reminds me of Shakespeare. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
I'm not as dumb as I think.
No, you made some good connections, but were you able to pick up some of just like the hilarious little things that he put in here, like in the descriptions of people?
Yes.
Okay.
Eventually, but so I just I read it the first time. I was like, I don't even know what's going on here because there's a lot and it's quick.
Yeah.
So he walks in, everybody goes silent, and they recognize him as the man from the fire that had taken charge. And I love this. Henry always signs his name with an extra E, Henry, insisting that was the name that he was Christianed with. And so that just makes me laugh. I mean, some people, when they name their kids, you're just like, pretty sure that's not how you spell that. Or I don't know.
Henry.
Yeah. So, and that's another thing that typing was really hard because my computer wanted to change it to Henry every time.
Oh,
Which I
yeah.
probably should have just went with it, but I was like, I gotta Henry. And so then we meet Joseph Poorgrass, and they're talking about, at this point, they're talking about Bathsheba, and he says that he blushes every time he sees her.
Yeah.
And then Jacob Smallberry, which we've seen before, right?
Yes.
But
Joseph Poorgrass, because they talk about that, about how he blushes all the time. But they also talk about how his family had tried to cure him of his bashfulness. In some ways, I was thinking about this as I was reading this last time. I was like, they kind of remind me of like the Seven Dwarves. You got like Bashful and Sleepy and Doc. Like, and he's bashful. And like, no matter what, he just blushes and he stumbles all over himself. He's also kind of like this funny little priest. Like he's very pious. But he said that his family even took him to like this show where all these girls were riding horses and like next to nothing. They were trying to get they were just trying to get like to not be embarrassed when he saw girls, but it didn't work.
Yeah, so Jacob Smallberry tells Gabriel that it's okay for a woman to be shy, but it's awkward for a man. And he's talking to Poorgrass. And Gabriel says, yeah, that's right. He's right. And then the others kind of come in and start talking about stories about Poorgrass being bashful. Gabriel asks about the farm and Bathsheba, but she'd only been there for a little while. And so I think they don't know much about her yet. I like how he's kind of gathering information. It's like slowly asking questions about her. So from her and then from others around. So then this name, Coggin, comes up a lot. There's a lot of people in this book that the last name of Coggin, they're all related. And I love this. He used to court his first wife, a dairymaid at Everdeen's farm. So her uncle's farm. And this is hilarious. The people were kind of generous and would supply him with ale. And he couldn't take it home, but he could drink what he could drink there. And so he would eat a lot of salt before he went there so that he could drink as much as possible.
Because he didn't want to be ill-mannered and only drink a little.
Right. He gotta get it all in.
Yes.
And then he talks about his wife's death a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, here's a word I didn't know. Ruefully. Ruefully. It means humorous regret. So he's like talking humorously, I guess. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. So,
oh my gosh. Well, so when sorry, were you going to talk about his wife's death?
Go for it.
Because he's like, his wife's name was Charlotte. She's like, poor Charlotte. I wonder if she had the good fortune to get into heaven when she died. But she was never much in luck's way. And perhaps she went downwards after all, poor soul. Maybe she ended up in hell. Darn it.
She never had luck on her side. I think that's what it is. No, wouldn't it be bad if it was?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I mean, I'm hoping just everybody goes to heaven, but yeah, if there was, it would be bad.
Yep.
Well, it's like toss it, like the 1-2, 1-2 when you're in a line and they're picking teams. Oh, you're going to heaven. Oh, you're going. That would be bad.
Yeah. For those of us who have bad luck, we just already know where we did that.
Yeah. So, I love that he used to eat salt before so he could drink as much as possible. Gabriel asks about her parents, and Jacob says they were town folk. Father was gentlemanly, but had lost hundreds of pounds of gold, and he was a fickle husband. I know what that word means, by the way.
Awesome.
In case you wondered. My mom used to make us do spelling words, and that was one of our words. But she would drill us on hundreds and hundreds of words. My sisters and I are very good spellers.
That's awesome. And fickle is such a good word.
Right.
So well done, your mom.
It's a little fickle. And then I love this. Coggin says his will to be good just wasn't strong enough.
I know. And it's so, yeah. Well, I loved it too because it was, I say love in sort of a facetious way, because it talks about how Levi Everdeen, Bathsheba's dad, he wasn't like that good looking of a man, but his wife was gorgeous. And so he really, really liked her. And he also was not, it says he was worth scores of pounds, and he became a very celebrated bankrupt 2 or 3 times. So he was really stupid with money. He was not very attractive. And then he like wasn't even faithful to his wife. And it was like he wanted to be faithful to his wife, but he just couldn't. His heart would rove. And so he decided to ask his wife to take off her wedding ring and he called her by her maiden name. And that would make him want her more, because he like tricked himself into believing that he didn't already have her by making her take off her wedding ring and go by her maiden name. And so poor lady, I could imagine her just being like, you are a fool. But
that is
that
funny.
was his little mechanism for keeping himself faithful to his wife.
Let's just pretend.
I know, like make it seem like he was still chasing her.
So, yeah, Henry Frey remarks that Bathsheba was never that pretty then. That's kind of funny. And Coggin says he hopes her temper is as nice as her face.
Yeah.
This is some funny stuff.
It really, well, yeah, because he's like, yeah, she wasn't a very pretty child. So I was really surprised she turned out so handsome.
Yeah. And then they talk about Bailiff Pennyways. That's the name of the bailiff for Bathsheba being kind of having thieving ways. Being a thief, which is the first that you hear about that. And then Gabriel starts talking about the maltster, how he must be really old because his sons are old. And the maltster says, I don't remember how old I am. I don't really know.
Yeah, he comes up with like 117 or something like that. But then they're like, no, you did some of your math wrong.
Yeah, he's like
I don't know.
Lists all the places he's lived. And then he asks how many years is that? And they're like, it's 117. And he's like, well, I'll just go with that. Yeah. And then, but he says, but the cup that I'm drinking out of is older than me. Okay, so then Henry mentions that they saw Gabriel playing his flute in Casterbridge. And Gabriel admits that he has been struggling to get by. And they ask him to play for him there. And he does. And then we meet Laban Tall. I'm sure.
Also, just mostly just known as Susan Tall's husband. That's because right. He has no individuality worth mentioning.
And it's back. This is another gender role kind of kicking against the gender roles, because that's not how it usually is, right? But he says that he liked it, that his playing was good. And Poorgrass says that he's a smart man and that they should be grateful to have him as a shepherd. So, and then they all say he's handsome. They're like, yeah, they do, complimenting him.
Yeah. Like, and he's a very good looking guy.
Yeah, you could play the flute. You can, you're good, you're smart, you're handsome. And so he thanks them. And then he decides Bathsheba is never going to hear me play, which is interesting because in the beginning, he was saying like he would play the flute while she played the piano when he asked her to marry him.
Yeah, so that's right.
Now he's like, nope, she's never going to hear me play. And then they all start to leave. Gabriel's going with Coggin because he had offered him a place to live. And then Henry comes running back in out of breath, saying that Bathsheba had caught Bailiff Pennyways stealing barley. And she went at him like a cat. Do you have that quote? Like, did you highlight it?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, read that. It's funny. Okay.
So they're like, found out he was stealing. And so Henry says, the news is that after Miss Everdeen got home, she went out again to see all was safe, as she usually do, and coming in found Bailey Pennyways creeping down the granary steps with half a bushel of barley. She fleed at him like a cat, never such a tomboy as she is. Of course, I speak with closed doors. You do, Henry. She fleed at him, and to cut a long story short, he owned to have carried off 5 sack altogether, upon her promising not to persecute him. Well, he's turned out neck and crop, and my question is, who's going to be Bailey now? So
That's
you
right.
know,
So now
yeah.
she doesn't have a bailiff, right? And so then, as Henry is kind of like catching his breath, then Laban, tall, he comes in with more news that Fanny Robin, this is where we meet her, sort of, can't be found. They don't know where she is. And Marianne is worried because Fanny had been kind of in low spirits lately. And so they all go up to the main house, and Miss Everdeen calls from the bedroom window asking if any of the men can go and try to find out about Fanny. Jacob asks if anyone had been courting her, and Bathsheba says any respectable lover would have come to the house.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
she was courting somebody, they weren't respectable. And she's worried because Fanny, the last time they saw her, was in an indoor working gown. So, like, where would she have gone dressed like that?
Yeah, because they were like, excuse me, any respectable woman would have gotten dressed up to go see him, just like any respectable man would have come to the house. Yes.
There's something fishy going on here.
Yeah, something very fishy.
And so then Marianne says that she did have a man, a soldier from Casterbridge. And so Bathsheba asks Billy Smallberry to go look for him tomorrow. And then she tells everybody good night. And Gabriel the end talks about how he's happy to see her in person again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
he's so in love. So in chapter 9, some words that I didn't know.
Okay.
Bower is a pleasant, shady place under trees.
Oh,
Isn't that interesting?
yeah. And that's okay. That's one of those that you read it in context and that's kind of the picture you get, but I didn't really know that was the actual definition.
And then hoary, Hoary, old and ordinary.
So I'm glad you brought this one up because, like you say, Hoary, hoary. So when we were studying the book of Isaiah in the Bible a few weeks ago, there's a few times that he uses the word hoary head or something like that. And so what we learned there in digging into it a little bit is that it means white or gray. Like,
yes,
so it's basically it's old.
Yep.
And so like hoarfrost, right? It's just white.
That was another definition, was whitish and grayish, something like that. And then a charwoman. So it mentions a charwoman, and that's a woman that's employed to clean houses or offices. So awesome. I thought that was interesting. So Bathsheba's house is old and creaky. And that's the idea we get from the descriptions in the beginning. And then Bathsheba and her servant, Liddy Smallberry, who is the great granddaughter of the maltster.
Because the Smallberries and the Coggins, they are the two families.
They're everywhere. And they're going through the Bathsheba's uncle's papers. And then Mr. Boldwood comes to the door, who's suitor number 2. Bathsheba isn't dressed well, so she tells Mrs. Coggin to say that she's busy. And they can hear his voice, and he's just saying that he wants to check on Fanny Robin, and then he just leaves. So this is interesting. The malt house is full of men. Bathsheba's house is full of women. And Bathsheba and Gabriel are both kind of relying on the locals to tell them things to learn, because they're new. So they're kind of gathering information from everybody. So Bathsheba asks who Mr. Boldwood is, because he's new to her. And Liddy, her servant, tells her he's an unmarried farmer and that he had put Fanny through school, which is why he was interested in her.
Yes. Yeah, that's why he has a concern.
Yes. So, I mean, is he like a father figure to her?
I mean, that's really like all the information that we have is that he put her through school. But the way that he's concerned about her, and like, what was it that made him want to put her through school? So there must be some sort of a kind of a fatherly relationship there.
And then Liddy tells her that a lot of girls have tried to court him, but it hasn't worked. They have not been successful, and he seems like he's kind of like out of it. He doesn't pay attention to that, or doesn't understand relationships. So then we meet Teddy. It's Teddy Smallberry, right? Or is it Coggin?
Teddy Coggins.
Teddy Coggins. See what I mean? You're either a Coggin or a Smallberry. He comes and he tells him that Mr. Bold, I want to say Baldwin every time. Mr. Boldwood had given him a penny for opening the gate. And he had asked if Miss Everdeen was old. And Teddy just says yes, because he wanted a penny.
Because he wanted a penny, and because to every child
thinks of
anybody is old. Any adult is old.
Yes. And Bathsheba's confused, and she's just like, well, okay. So Liddy and Bathsheba are now alone again because they both leave. And Liddy asks Bathsheba if anyone has ever wanted to marry her before. And she said, well, one man did once. I wonder who we're talking about. But he wasn't quite good enough for her, even though she kind of liked him. And then they hear footsteps, and they look out the window and see like a file of men coming to the house.
Yes.
So yeah, what was that chapter called?
Oh, Half Confidences.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add about that one?
I don't think so. I feel like that chapter, it's really good. It also just kind of like moves the story along.
Yeah.
And maybe someone else would have something to say about that. But, it's still giving us the idea that Bathsheba still considers herself too good for Gabriel. That's where she's still at. And maybe her new situation has sort of elevated herself in her own mind too, to where she still thinks that. Well, we know that she does. So chapter 10. So we ended chapter 9 with this file of men coming to her house. And we get the impression that it is actually payday. And so she's like, and it's, I think, probably the first payday since she took over the farm. So she's like, okay, here we go. And so everybody comes in, and she has like a book where she has all of her records. Probably her uncle had kept this book, so she has everybody's name and like what they get paid, but it's not obvious that she knows what they do. Like, it probably wasn't written down. So she'll say somebody's name, and then she says, well, what do you do? So she starts with Joseph Poorgrass, and she says, and what are you? And he's like, well, nothing in my own eye. In the eye of other people, well, I don't say it, though public thought will out. She's like, what do you do on the farm? He's like, I do carting things all the year, and in seed time I shoots the rooks and sparrows and helps at pig killing. And he keeps calling her sir, which is so funny because, as we talked about before, like, he gets super nervous in front of women in general, especially beautiful women. And he's used to the master of this farm being a man, her uncle, and he keeps calling her sir. And so she gives them their money, and she even gives them a little bonus. And she talks about how she kind of feels good about herself for being so generous and giving them a little bonus. And we also get the idea that Henry Frey is right there, and he kind of like sidles up to her, and so she'll ask him questions and he'll answer. He's like sort of vying for the position of bailiff. That's what he wants. But he sort of makes himself a nuisance. And then she calls out Matthew Moon, and I'm only bringing this out because it's really funny. So she says, how much do I owe you, that man in the corner? What's your name? Matthew Moon, ma'am. Said, a singular framework of clothes with nothing of any consequence inside them. Like, he's clothes, there's his clothes, and inside his clothes,
there's not much there.
Nothing to talk about. Yeah. Anyway. And then we find out that there's another guy named Andrew Randall who has a serious stammering problem, a stutter. I guess he's had a hard time keeping a job because Henry Frey tells her the only time he ever did speak plain, he said his soul was his own and other iniquities to his squire, and he was sort of kicked off that farm. But I think it seems that he's a good worker. There's some women that work on her farm. She pays them. And she comes across Susan Tall. Also, Susan Tall is there. And we don't know how old she was because he describes her. He says, this lady called herself 25. She looked 30. She passed as 35 and was 40. She was a woman who never, like some newly married, showed conjugal tenderness in public, perhaps because she had none to show. So she's just this really rough woman. What I imagine is that Laban, her husband, is probably much younger than her and was thrilled that this older woman liked him. And so he married her only to find that she was quite the handful.
Yeah, and she's always speaking for him.
Yeah. And doesn't think he has anything good to say.
Yeah.
And then she also pays little Cain Ball, who's just this little boy who becomes Gabriel Oakes. What do I want to say? Partner.
I love this story.
Oh my gosh. Do you want to tell this story? It's so funny.
Yes. So Bathsheba's like, how did he get his name?
Why is it Cain?
Yes, why is his name Cain? His mother, not one to read scripture, mixed up Cain and Abel at his christening and didn't find out until it was too late. So she thought that Cain was like the good son. Yeah. So she named him that. But then they softened the name by calling him Caney.
Yeah.
So the poor woman cried and cried. And she was raised by heathen parents, so it wasn't her fault.
And it shows how the sins of the parents are visited upon the children.
Yeah, I have a funny story to tell you about that.
Okay.
So my dad's family, his siblings have very interesting names, but they're just different. Like none of them go by their actual name. I have an uncle Slick, and his real name is Tomato. His name is Tomato Slick.
No, it is not.
Yeah, he's passed away. He just passed away a couple of years ago, but so I've heard several stories on why that's his name. One was that my grandpa was at war when my grandma gave birth to him and didn't know what to name him. And they were living in Tomato, Arkansas. So they just named him Tomato. Then I heard another story that was like, it was a joke, but then it got put down on the birth certificate anyways, and they just left it. So anyways, I just thought that was really funny. And he went by Glenn, which was their uncle's name, because I mean, you can't go through school as Tomato. But and so he went by Glenn, but his birth certificate says Tomato, and he actually made it into like a book of like strange names.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We always called him Slick. His name was always Slick, but Tomato Slick Slaughter. Is that funny? That was his name.
Oh my gosh. And he was born in Arkansas. Is that what you said?
I guess.
I feel like that is such. I'm not going to say anything.
No, in my family, the stories are like something happens and there's 2 or 3 stories. So I don't know which one is correct.
Okay.
But I do know that his name was Tomato.
That is so funny. And I guess what I was going to say is like, that seems like the kind of name that would come out of like the deep South, like the bayou.
Well,
I don't know.
They lived in Mississippi. No. I think they moved to Mississippi like right after he was, I don't know. It's crazy. I don't know if it was a joke or if it was like, I mean, come on, Grandma, like you didn't know any other names? Like
maybe she was like, this is so cool. And like, it'll be very up and coming and trendy.
I don't think so.
We'll call him Tommy.
I don't think so. I know my grandma. I do not think that was. She was not trying to be trendy.
Oh my gosh. But can you imagine just holding your little baby and be like, oh yeah, this is baby Tommy.
I wonder what they never called him that. So I wonder what they called him.
Oh my
like
gosh.
As a baby. My dad's younger than him, so he wouldn't know. But I'm gonna ask because I have an uncle that's old enough that he could tell me. I'll just ask him, what did you call him when he was first born? I mean, were they like, well, really his name was supposed to be Glenn, so we're just gonna call him Glenn. Probably. But anyways, so Cain, Tomato.
Yeah. I feel like Tomato might be worse.
Yes.
Okay.
Go on. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that was like, that's awesome. Side note. Okay. So they do get a little like right then when she's doing all like the payday business, they do get some news about Fanny Robin. And it's not necessarily accurate, but it's all they have. And Billy Smallberry comes in and he says that he's found out that she's run off with the soldiers. And the soldiers had just left the town and he thinks that she's with them. And then we get this little Bathsheba's moment to sort of declare herself to her workers, to be like, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do. And so she says, now mind, you have a mistress instead of a master. I don't yet know my powers or my talents in farming, but I shall do my best. And if you serve me well, so shall I serve you. Don't any unfair ones among you, if there are any such, but I hope not, suppose that because I'm a woman, I don't understand the difference between bad goings on and good. I shall be up before you are awake. I shall be afield before you are up, and I shall have breakfasted before you are afield. In short, I shall astonish you all. And so I think that she's off to a good start. You know, she has a lot of learning to do, a lot of growth. And of course, she's not perfect, but she has these very great determinations and goals, and she works hard to accomplish them. And she's not going to let the fact that she's a woman in this male dominated field hold her back from doing and being the best that she can. So, okay. So we have had a great opening to our discussion of Far from the Madding Crowd. We've gotten through chapters 1 through 10, and lots has happened so far. And there's lots more to come. Anything you want to throw in there?
Lots more, right?
There's so much.
We're going to meet Sergeant Troy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to be meeting Sergeant Troy. There's going to be a lot of exciting and interesting letters and Valentines, and the plot just really thickens in the next 10 chapters. And so with our next episode, we will be covering chapters 11 through 20. Yeah.
Lots
to look forward to.
My mother-in-law, like her husband had surgery, and so she's been reading the book and she's like, I'm just not really loving it. You know, it's hard, right? And I just keep saying, it's gonna get thick, it's gonna get better, it's gonna, like, the further you go, the more interesting it gets, the more stuff that happens. And so I think each episode's gonna like build on the excitement.
Well, and hopefully for those who are having a hard time getting into it, if they can maybe read and then listen to our podcast, because I think that was kind of our goal, is to break down the chapters so that they're very understandable. Hopefully that's what we're doing, because these are hard. And so that's why we've taken the time to really study them and really understand the plot line so that we can break it down and make it a lot more accessible.
Okay, think of it like a school assignment. Yeah. Like, we're going to discuss chapters 1 through 10 next week. And so just like think of it as that's your completion. It's 1 through 10. And then we're going to listen to it. Then you kind of have an idea of what's happened. And then we'll give you, like you just did, a little clue about what's coming. And then the next week you'll read it. So kind of slow, deep read of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
So, awesome. So next week, chapters 11 through 20. So what are you reading?
Okay, I was kind of debating what I should share, because I've been reading some great books with my kids, but I think that today I'll share the one that I'm currently reading. So I'm not done with it, and maybe like everybody has already read this besides me. I don't know, but it's Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier. It's how I'm going to say her name. I believe it was turned into a movie. So it's based on Vermeer's painting of The Girl with the Pearl Earring. And it's sort of like the author she just took the painting and like gave it a backstory, because it's one of those sort of mysterious ones, sort of like Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, that nobody really knows the story behind it. And so she gave it a story. And of course, she gives it, accurate historical backdrop, and it involves Vermeer and his family, and they're in Denmark in the 1600s. And anyway, I am really enjoying it so far.
Are you reading it
Really
on paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like reading the physical book. So I have all these books on hold to listen to, and they're all like the shortest wait is like 16 weeks.
So I am a little late to the party, but I just read A Man Called Uwe. Have you read that?
Oh, I haven't, but it's everywhere. Everybody talks
Yes.
about it.
So it's coming, the movie's coming out. Tom Hanks it's
Yes.
called I think it's either called Otto or A Man Called Otto.
Okay.
But he's Uwe in the movie.
Okay.
And I saw the previews and I was like, okay, this isn't the signal that I finally need to read this. I don't know what will be. And I thought it was coming out like in a couple of weeks or by Christmas. And so I read the book really fast, and it's not coming out till January. But it is the cutest book.
That's what I've heard.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so and I don't laugh out loud like very often when I'm listening or reading to a book. And I totally laughed out loud a couple of times.
You did. Oh, I love it.
So, and cried, at the end. But he's like this curmudgeon that is angry about everything. Presley and I just went to see Lyle Crocodile, and there's a guy that lives underneath the family that's like that. That's like hates everybody and everything, and is strict and enforces all the rules. And so you kind of find out why he's like that. Okay. What his backstory is, and then how his wife has passed away and stuff. But the whole maybe second half of the book is he wants to commit suicide.
Oh.
But things keep happening where he has to help people. And so he'd go talk to his wife and be like, well, I'm trying to come meet you, but I'm too busy. And he tries all these different ways.
Oh my gosh.
It's really cute. But
that sounds really sweet.
It kind of shows how serving other people and helping those around you takes you out of yourself.
Yes. What a beautiful message.
So good.
Something that's really very timely too. Yeah. So somebody needs to write that with a teenager as the protagonist. And
right.
Yeah.
That would be good. Yeah, I'm so excited to see the movie.
Cool.
So excited.
So we're so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you will join us next week as we continue our discussion of Far from the Madding Crowd, chapters 11 through 20. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.